Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are in 2 Timothy chapter 2. We're going to be starting verse 20 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. As we begin verse 20, we see that verses 20 through 23 speak of being a sanctified vessel. So verses 20 to 23 are dealing with the Christian being a sanctified vessel. Now, we start here in verse 20. It says here, let's read verse 20. It says, but in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth, and some to honor and some to dishonor. Now, he says here, but in a great house. Now, sometimes commentators can go a little bit too far in their analysis of words and phrases in the Bible. And I think that this is one of those times. He says here, but in a great house. And I think sometimes we try to analyze things too much. And I think commentators and Bible scholars want to analyze everything. But I think in this case, they go a little too far. Many of them connect the great house that's in verse 20 with the foundation that's in verse 19. Some of them say that the foundation represents the invisible church of believers, while the great house in verse 20 represents the visible church throughout the world. For example, the Catholic Church, the Baptist Church, the Methodist Church, the Lutherans, the Pentecostals, and churches, and all of them. So some say, that in verse 19, the sure foundation is the church, the body of Christ. And now in verse 20, in a great house. They connect the great house with the foundation, and they say it's all the body of Christ. And some of them say, no, that's not true. Verse 19 tells us about the foundation of the body of Christ, which is the true believers. But the great house in verse 20 is dealing with the worldwide church, like the worldwide group of churches that are on the earth, filled with saved and unsaved. And, some of them say that the great house represents the body of Christ, and that the vessels of gold and of silver and of wood are believers based upon their maturity. But personally, I think the main thought of Paul in verses 20 through 23 is the purging of ourselves from the world and from unholy, empty words, so that we can be a vessel unto honor, and that the great house is nothing more than just an analogy by Paul, which he uses to teach this principle. I don't think this great look, I think that this great house that he's talking about, it's basically what came to Paul's mind when he wanted to teach about being a sanctified vessel unto God. I think sometimes we read too much into things that really aren't there. Maybe Paul really does have a secret message in this great house. I just don't think so. I don't think Paul is trying to secretly, communicate something to us about a great house as opposed to a foundation in verse 19, and somehow they're linked. And why doesn't he just come right out and say it? But here he says, in a great house, there's not only vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth, and some to honor and some to dishonor. And I think he's just using the analogy of a big house, of a house that has vessels of honor and vessels of dishonor. And he's trying to teach this thing, and I think that he just uses it. It comes to his mind and he uses it. And I don't think it's anything really more than that. Could it be? Sure, it could be. It could be more than that. But I think the main teaching that Paul is trying to get at is that we should be holy vessels. That's the main teaching is. It's not the house. Don't focus on the house. It's the teaching of us being a vessel unto honor. That's the focus of these verses. So he says here, but in a great house there are not only, then he says, vessels of gold and silver, and of wood and of earth, and some to honor and some to dishonor. Now, the issue between these different kinds of vessels isn't saved or unsaved, but it has to do with the kind of service that you perform. All right? Again, it's nothing to do with whether the person is saved, whether the gold vessel is saved and the wood vessel is unsaved. It has nothing to do with saved or unsaved, but it has to do with the kind of service that you perform. If you keep yourself free from the pollutants of this world, it does not mean special honor or special privileges, but it means special service unto God. Christians should be preparing themselves for service, not for honor. We should be preparing ourselves, what? For service unto God, not for honor from God. Will we receive honor from God? Yes. But that's not our goal. Our goal isn't to be, I want honor from God. No, it's how can I serve God? How can I minister unto him? And that's what a vessel does. A vessel isn't for honor. A vessel is to serve the one who made it. It's for service. And Christians should be preparing themselves for service unto God, not for honor, living their life because they know they're going to get honored. No, Christian should be preparing themselves for service to God. As a vessel was made for the purpose of serving, so the Christian finds their fulfillment in God when they can serve God and when they can serve others. You want to feel fulfilled in your Christian walk? We then serve God. It's serving God, or serve the brethren. Be available to God, to witness to someone. Be available to call someone and pray with them. Be available to serve the church, serve the body. That's what we were made for. We were made for service, not for honor. God didn't make us and then want to stick us on a shelf and say, look at that, aren't they wonderful? Aren't they beautiful? Right? And admire that gold vessel that I just made. No, it's not for that, but it has to. We were made for service. We were made to serve God. Service is what we should seek for, not honor. We should be seeking to serve God, not the honor that comes from God. Will the honor come? Yes. But we should be seeking to serve God, because that's where our what we were made for, how we fulfill our calling unto God. All the gifts of God deal with service to the body of Christ, or service unto God. They're not for self-pleasure. When God gives a gift to you, it's not for your own selfishness. It's not for your own benefit. It's for the benefit of others. There will be no honor and no crowns in heaven for those who shunned service, who shunned serving God or the body of Christ. The honor is not going to come if we just sit home and twiddle our thumbs and rock in a rocking chair and say, God, thank you for saving me, and studying our Bible and doing nothing with it. All this whole purpose is that we take it and use it for others, to be used for. You're a vessel. You are a vessel of God. Remember, last lesson, he bought you. You belong to him. And we need to serve, be available to be used by God to serve others in the body of Christ. So next lesson, as we begin verse 21, he says here, let me read this again. But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, but also of wood and of earth, and some to honor and some to dishonor. Remember, the issue isn't the great house. The issue is the vessels and their makeup of service to the king, to the person who made them. It has to do with what they were designed for and how they're being used. All right? So until next lesson, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.